Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Todd, and I'm one of the Associate Directors for this year's IWAC conference. We have two sessions during this hour, Celebrating and Disseminating Effective Assignments, an international peer-reviewed WAC assignment database, and Towards Expanding WAC Pedagogy in German High Schools. Before we begin, a few technical reminders. During the presentations, please ensure that your mics are muted, particularly because our sessions will be recorded in speaker view. To ask any questions, you can use the chat function below. You can enter your questions at any time, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the talks. And now I'm going to pass it over to the session chair, Paul Cook, to introduce the panel and our speakers for today. Thank you all for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Paul Cook from Indiana University, Kokomo. I'm happy to be here. And what I'll do now is just go ahead and introduce our first presenter, and that's Andrea Williams. And then I'll introduce Stefan right after that when it's his turn to go. So a little bit about Andrea. Andrea has a PhD in rhetoric and composition from the Ohio State University. And she is associate professor teaching stream at the University of Toronto, where she has directed writing integrated teaching since 2011. She recently became director of the writing and rhetoric program at Ennis College, where she teaches courses on the history and theory of rhetoric, digital rhetoric, and environmental writing. She has published on writing pedagogy in chemistry and economics and on TA education. She co-edited with Tanya Rodrigue a 2016 special issue in Across the Disciplines on the role of TAs in WAC. And her book, Cross-Border Networks in Writing Studies, co-authored with Jennifer Clary Lemon, Derek Mueller, and Louise Weatherby Phelps, explores disciplinary networks in writing students in Canada and the US. And then finally, Andrea is founder of Assignments Across Disciplines, a peer-reviewed open access educational resource, which has inspired her current research on the creation and circulation of assignments and attribution practices related to assignments in the academy. All right, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And okay, is that working? Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so a little bit just about my institutional context, which I think is probably helpful. Oops, hold on. I'm at a large public research intensive university, and so sometimes it's difficult to get faculty to really attend to assignments. First, I want to talk about sort of the whole theoretical issues and questions that have emerged from this, what started out as a very practical project, and just hint at what I'm really thinking about assignments as occluded genres. And then I want to, I'll explain kind of the goals, values, so where I'm headed with the project, milestones, and then a little bit about the platform itself, which distinguishes this project from other assignment libraries in a couple of ways that I think are actually important. For some reason, I'm not advancing. So I'm preaching to the choir here. I know that. Assignments are the building blocks of learning. But not all faculty think of assignments this ways. And I love this quotation about students failing assignments, and sometimes assignments failing students, from Germano and Nichols' book on the syllabus. And I also think it's a really interesting kind of metaphor of student work is the engine of a course, and then assignments are the creative center. And I really agree with this. And I think those of us in WAC, we know how important assignments are, but that can be a tough sell, particularly, in the context of a research university, but also just all the many hats that instructors wear. So you're going to recognize, at least probably most of you, two of these books that have informed this project, the Meaningful Writing Project, and Prompt. I was on a panel, I think it was in 2016, with the founders of Prompt. So I was really, my project was inspired by their journal, just like people, them taking seriously assignments. And then I was part of a large national Canadian study that had federal funding, sort of like, I guess, the NEH, the US Canadian version of the NEH. So we published a book outside of this multi-institutional project. We were collecting and analyzing big data about assignments. So that book came out of that. I did a chapter on writing in biology. And that really prompted more questions for me about assignments. So the more I've got into this project, the more I'm going, well, why do we not really recognize why are assignments not authored? and how does this impact teaching and learning, and how we see teaching and learning? I think we all agree in our field that assignments are really important. The whole term occluded genre was first used by Swales. And assignments really they're kind of overlooked. They don't get a whole lot of love or attention or respect outside of WAC. But also, so now I'm wondering why. Is it because they're sort of, Bakhtinian terms heteroglossic? I also think, they're collaborative. And as we know, in the humanities, people have a distrust of collaboratively authored documents. They're often remixes and mashups. They're ephemeral. There's been a lot of attention and scholarship on teaching philosophies, interestingly enough, and those are important. But when you think about it, assignments have a far bigger impact. And as the paper I'm working on right now, you can kind of fake teaching philosophies in the sense that you can say whatever you want, but really one's values and practices as a teacher really come through in assignments, and they have a huge impact on students. Whereas someone's teaching philosophy, it just impacts them. Like, do they get hired? Do they get promoted? But assignments have a huge impact on a lot of people, i.e. students. So we have, what I'm identifying is a knowledge gap and lots of interesting questions. And I know Thomas Polk is presenting at the same time, which is too bad because I really wanted to meet him. But he really points out in his 2019 article just how little we know about the factors that influence instructors in assignment design. And he did a study, like a case study or a small group of instructors, and interviewed them. So one of the questions that's come out is how do assignments circulate? How can we track this creation, recreation, circulation? And what's that going to tell us? And how can we support assignment sharing, yet also really push to give more credit for it? And can assignment libraries like mine and like I don't know how you say it, NILOA or whatever, which emerged around the same time as I started to get funding for this, can they help achieve this goal? So the catalyst was my sabbatical in 2017. I was honestly thinking, it sounds so silly, but if I get hit by a bus, what's going to happen with all that institutional knowledge I have of assignments? And I'm kind of like the broker, like a lot of WAC people at my institution. So statistics wants to integrate writing into their department, so they turn to me, and then I say, hey, look at economics, and I'll connect you with some assignments and instructors there. So with me out of the picture, and I'm not going to be directing the program forever, what happens? Where do those assignments go where do they go when people retire, when people stop teaching a course? I think people, it's not that they don't want to share, they just don't see their assignments, they don't recognize the value. So my goal was really to create this database, and I knew I wanted it peer reviewed and to give it that status and that the whole question of authorship and credit. And I also knew I wanted to make it open access. So my institution said, hey, use T-Space. And some of you might be familiar with it, but it's like if you search assignments across disciplines, it'll come up on Google. And TSpace has a controlled vocabulary. So I've been working for a couple of years with librarians to kind of figure that out. But it also has a lot of metadata, which I'm still learning about. That's just a screenshot of, and I've got only about 27 published, but I've got like a ton, like, oh, you know, gosh, like another 15 ready to go. So one of the differences between this project and the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA's library or CORA's, is that mine, early on in the project, I shifted from saying, okay, I want to make a writing assignment library or database, and people on my advisory committee were like, why stop there? Why not just make an assignment one? So I said, sure, because also like the boundaries, how much writing? So this is it's open. It's not just reading or writing assignments. It's all assignments, and it's housed outside the U.S. I think that's really important. Internationalizing our field has been a theme of this conference and of the plenary. So I'm proud to I want to start brokering that, not just Canadian, but open to other countries. For some reason, I'm having trouble forwarding this. Hold on, sorry. So the key values informing this project are those that we're all talking about: accessibility, inclusion. Some of you might be familiar with the teaching at higher education. I always get the acronym wrong. And that's really the whole transparency in assignments and teaching. That's really informed. I read a lot about that. And then the value of collaboration and sharing. I already mentioned the concept of open educational resource and that peer review, but I'll explain how that's evolved a little bit. And really looking towards innovation too, alternative assignments and multimodal assessments. One of the things that came out of the national study that I was involved with was that we found most assignments at our university and other institutions ask students to write only for academic audiences. So I count that as an alternative assignment for, different audiences. And a lot in, say, the field of economics, we're increasingly asking students to write to non-experts, right? Maybe a manager or a government person who is not an economist, but yet economics, they need to understand economic concepts or models. So these are the objectives. And I just want to flag that whole, community of practice has become more and more important at my institution as I've begun working on this. And this vexing question of visibility and value, how do we cite them? Why don't we cite them? So I've been trying to think of incentives. So I've been writing letters for people's annual reports and dossiers, and I've created an award that we're going to launch in the spring. And I've also added this commentary session so that people, contributors it's a way of marking, they can comment. That commentary can go into their dossier for promotion, like how has the assignment changed or what's their reflection around the assignment. This is just the submission form that we've created. And we tried to make it pretty quick for people to encourage them to submit. And I've been working with the team of, a couple of research assistants. And I tried to keep it simple, right? Like not more than 15 minutes to fill out. And then I have a similar form for the review process that I'll get to in a minute. Hold on a second. I don't know why I'm. Sorry. So I've tried to have fairly capacious criteria. Like submission should, give students a juicy, relevant problem that students, should have a chance to develop their knowledge and key skills. And obviously clarity and instructions, right? With the whole transparency thing. You specify the genre, audience, and evaluation criteria. Really, that's at my institution pretty common for quantitative disciplines, that 3E. People in the humanities tend to really resist that, but we're seeing a gradual cultural change there. And, encouraging that sequencing, staging, scaffolding course that you all know about. And even we have very large classes, and TAs do the bulk of grading, but to encourage even peer review, some kind, or that students take their work to the writing center. And increasingly that they follow accessibility guidelines. Now that's a really low bar. What I'm really trying to do also is to get, I want to have more assignments that use, say, inclusive data sets. Like I've been working with the Department of Linguistics, and they've been doing a lot around incorporating data sets from non-European, Indo-European languages, right? Like not just being very Western focused, for example. So these are just some of the key milestones. I won't read them all out, but it's very laborious. It's taken way longer than I thought. Even things like figuring out the criteria, coming up with review committees, advisory committee, and yeah, just it's like it's a little bit longer than what I thought. This piece has been really interesting. I started out wanting to do this blind peer review, not double blind, but blind on, the contributor wouldn't know. And then I realized, no, it's more about having conversations. And NILOA has these assignment charrettes, the term they took from architecture. And I really love that idea. I sort of found that after, but some of my colleagues suggested, well, like, let's just have a conversation with the person. So that's a piece that we've added. So it's more formative than evaluative. And the other key thing here is I don't want it just to be about instructors. We've tried to encourage all of these people to be involved, like graduate teaching assistants can serve as reviewers. They have, involving, of course, a huge partner is the writing center instructors, librarians who see tons of assignments, and all these other groups of people to really, and of course, students themselves, right? Nominate, we have a button they can press and submit a favorite assignment, and why, sort of, again, I'm building on, was inspired by the work, of the Meaningful Writing Project. And that's just, so the next steps is grow and launch these awards. That it's actually the student group, our Arts and Science Student Union, which is this huge student organization. They have agreed to put money up for the award, and we're going to have one in each kind of general area, like one for the humanities, one for social science, one for sciences. And then really, I want to make it more interactive, the online component of having, discussion boards and have people describe how they adapted an assignment, and then make the website itself multimodal with some interviews. Whoops. And then really for myself to give this project status is to publish about it. That's my next step. And I do have a fantasy of having a really easy to use app for it. And then, of course, expanding, which is why I'm here, talking about it, expanding beyond the University of Toronto and Canada. And then long term, I always envisioned, this is partly, I think, why I got the grant, was using the database itself with all that metadata of, you can track you can't track how many hits individual assignments get. I'm still figuring this out, but basically I want to track assignments over time. How do they change? I think that would be really interesting. So I'd love to hear from you, your questions, or also just like suggestions about potential allies, whether individuals or organizations within our or linked to our field. Is there anything that I've not thought about yet? And research ideas that come to mind. And those are my references, which I just want to highlight. Thomas Polk's, yeah, because that was a really interesting article for me and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Do we want to take a few minutes now for questions, or should we wait until the end and do them at all at once? Does anyone have any strong preferences?
I'm happy to wait.
I could ask a question now.
Sure,
Yes,
sure.
since you had the questions, and we have so many people here.
Yeah,
Raise their hand.
no pressure or anything. I'm trying to take up several chairs right now, but I'm really fascinated with the idea. And I mean, the idea of having this collaborative process and peer review and basically bringing assignment writing into the same kind of set of processes that other type of writing enjoys is I think long overdue. However,
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever met faculty, but that's kind of a joke, but I'm thinking herding cats because, well, and also just if faculty members, and maybe in my experience, I have experienced teaching in 3 institutions to varying degrees, but most faculty members seem very protective of their assignments and their work, and either not necessarily wanting to share or being really sensitive to criticism and being sensitive to having someone else in their classroom telling them what to do.
Totally. Yeah. So,
And,
yeah, sorry, go on.
So I don't know, like how, like that has to be looked at. Like you can't ignore that propensity of faculty members, and how you would address that, I don't know. I'll just toss it on the table.
Yeah, just quickly, what I would say is I collect the feedback forms, and I'm also really careful about who I select to give the feedback, right? And what I've done is each assignment is reviewed by 3 people, and one of them has to be from a cognate discipline. Like I just want that insider perspective. The other 2 can be from whatever. And so far, they're generally really constructive. But I edit it and compile it the way a journal editor would, which is partly why it takes so long, and to make sure that it's all couched positively and all the rest of it. Because you're right. I mean, so far, I guess I've approached or had submissions of people who were confident enough and willing to go through the process. But I think you're right. I think it probably discourages some people who don't want to go through that. But I'm really careful to make it constructive and not overly prescriptive. That's why the criteria is fairly open, as you can see.
Yeah,
anyway.
that's great. And having it something that can be where you can reach out to people at other institutions would really be helpful, because sometimes I suspect people can accept criticism from someone at a different institution, and I'm talking about constructive criticism from a different institution more easily than the person with the office next door. And so being able to reach out across the country and interact might be the way to go, which is kind of sad, but also kind of just the way it is.
I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a wonderful idea. I'm going to be talking about this with our lead faculty member, because this is something that we've actually sort of in a limited way tried. And so I'm going to suggest to him that we think about it a little bit further and see if we can come up with a more friendly manner to get a little of this sort of thing going on. And so I think he will, once this presentation is available, he would really enjoy listening to your little talk.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thank you, Laura.
And maybe, Andrea, I want to say that I'm excited to see that you are thinking about formative feedback rather than summative feedback in the peer review process. I think so. I'm influenced by Nancy Summers and all her studies. And so positive, constructive feedback is so much more important. So that begs the question, do you have a revise and resubmit similar to the journal process?
Yeah, so how I've decided to couch it is, hey, this is some feedback. Take it as you will, like,
Okay.
and give people, and in almost every case, they take it and adapt it, like, they take most of it.
And they submit it to your
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So
Yep.
one thing that
I couch it very carefully.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I know exactly what you're talking about, like being open to criticism. like we do something where we take students from the Center for Teaching and Learning, and they visit classes. They also review syllabi and assignments and give feedback. But sometimes I think those undergrads are not prepared, or so I like your system. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Paul.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for that, Andrea. One thing I'll say, I have a lot of things I want to say, but I want us to move on. But one thing that occurred to me as I was listening was if you could somehow turn this into a kind of almost like a social media type, I think what we need is almost like a Facebook for assignments. And you could find a way to kind of capture people's imaginations in that way and get them to where they really want to share, or even feel compelled to share. I just wonder, I mean, again, I don't know how one would operationalize that, but I just think that is such a cool idea, and I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
I mean, again, how would one do that? But anyway, okay. So our second talk of the evening comes from Stefan Gunzel, and he teaches as an associate lecturer at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, and was a coordinator in the writing across the curriculum program there from 2012 to 2019. He is a graduate of the University of Leipzig, Germany, and the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. He currently teaches first-year writing and professional writing. Stefan's work and research focus on university-wide initiatives, such as the teaching of writing on the graduate and undergraduate level, writing center studies and embedded tutoring, training of faculty and graduate students to teach writing, and developing sustainable learning communities. Before the pandemic, he began to research and teach across the Atlantic when partnering with 2 German high schools. He has published scholarship on embedding disciplinary writing consultants in a history course in Praxis, and a piece called Mapping Professional and Technical Communication in German Higher Education in the Neue Länder since 1989. In a journal entitled Rethinking Post-Communist Rhetoric. So Stefan, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. And while I'm sharing my screen, I just want to say real quick, and you could not have known this, but there was actually a book, my chapter in a book, and I was not clear in my description.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my fault. It was my fault.
No, thank you for that clear. I said, that's a fascinating title for a journal, but it sounds very specific. So
yeah. No. It was a collection. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
So, but welcome everybody. I want to also keep it brief and have more time for question and answers. So I don't want to address every possible question in my talk. So I'm cutting a little bit as I go. So as you can see, I already changed a little bit the title from towards expanding WAC pedagogy in German high schools and replaced WAC pedagogy with mobility, because the more research I have been doing on this, it has become clear to me that WAC pedagogy is something that on the one hand, we practice in England and also in the US, and we talk about it extensively, but this is not really the term that the European Union uses, or the Bologna process. Plus, I think mobility describes much more specifically what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to address. Before I start, I want to give the land acknowledgement. Some of you may know that the first time I encountered one was 3 years ago with the 4 Cs. This is the land acknowledgement that my department for writing and rhetoric put out to recognize the Seminole, Miccosukee, Timucua, and numerous other native tribes. What I learned in that process is that, first of all, we are one only of 5 departments on campus that have such a land acknowledgement, mostly in the humanities and the Office of Diversity. The University in Central Florida does not have one. And I further learned that the Seminole is actually a term used for all remnants of the different tribes that were forced to move, but some of the people stayed behind. And in 1957, all the Indian remnants, or the remnants of Indian tribes, formed the Seminole tribe of Florida that is also connected to the Seminole in Oklahoma. So, but this acknowledgement reaffirms our department's commitment to practice, recognizing our institutional history and responsibility to honor indigenous knowledge systems. As a program invested in the study of language, we will continue working towards mitigating the inequalities and standardization of language that are products of violent histories. So part of it was linguistic justice, the book that we read last year, and we had the author come to the department. So although we are the largest university in the country by undergraduate enrollment, nobody seems to know us, University of Central Florida. We are the Golden Knights. We are 57 years old. You can see upper right corner, our administrative building. You have a shot of campus. We are on over 450 acres. We have lots of swamplands still available where alligators and snakes live. So that is not a surprise. And then lower left corner, we just opened before the pandemic hit our downtown campus, modeled after Arizona State. So I think Arizona State is one of our institutions that we are striving to be. We are research focused university. We want to be an R1 eventually, and that is our goal. So here you see how much green space we have and how this is the main campus actually here. So overview and context for this presentation. How did the collaboration start? I want to give some context for this project and embed it within the larger context of the Bologna process and European Union, describe what has happened so far, and also discuss possible next steps. So I partnered in 1918 with two schools. One is a public school, the Martin Luther School in Marburg, which is a public school downtown in this, located in this rather old building, which has always been a public school from the 1880s. And then the other one is partner is a private school in the outskirts, very green, modern. And the philosophies are also very different, and you will see why this is important later on. So if you are, many of you are probably not familiar with the German or the European education system, but David Foster describes in his Making the Transition to University Student Writers in Germany, he provides a very good definition and description of what it means to transition, what it means to specialize. Students basically specialize between gymnasium and regular school in 5th grade. And then you can still have the option of leaving that school after 10th grade and then pursue an AA degree. And only about 50 to 60% of German students get the Abitur after 12 or 13 years, and that prepares them to attend college. So this is vastly different from the United States. So, but what I think we should focus on here is the phrase that the transition from high school to college is seen as being as a novice entering the specialized field of their majors. Every student will be admitted to their bachelor's degree or major upon arrival on college and is expected to finish it after 6 semesters. So, and so there seems to be this whole idea of this prescribed course from you do this in high school, you follow those tracks either in language or in STEM or in sports or in the arts, and then you continue in college. So this book, Mobility, Work, and Composition, will be published later on, but the online version is already available. That kind of made me change my thinking about this project and to no longer advocate for, hey, bring some WAC pedagogy to German high schools, but let's think about mobility. And this is a term that the European Union also uses in the Bologna process. And so mobility here in the book by Horner, Hartline, Kumari, and Matravers is being described as a world of fluidity, a sea, as it were, of currents in and on and with which various entities contend. In such a world, even those entities that appear stable are necessarily mobile, like boats at sea, in order to maintain their seemingly stable position. Stasis, rather than the assumed norm, becomes a point of inquiry, something to be accounted for. A further consequence of adopting a mobilities paradigm is that more attention is drawn to the forces shaping, setting the pace, direction, quality, and effects of mobility, thereby producing diverse kinds of mobilities, ascribe different meanings For example, the mobility of the itinerant laborer versus the mobility of the idle global rich, end quote. And so this is really helping me to address what I'm trying to do with my colleagues at those two high schools, because mobility is a term that is frequently used, but it's mostly focused on, hey, we need to teach our students several languages because we live in Europe and it is a multilingual but which entity where we want students to be mobile and move from country to country, from one educational system or workplace to another. And so hence mobility works much better for me for this project. So I'm grounding the project not from the bottom up, as I also have to do, and I will drill in more specifically, but I'm also looking at from the top to the bottom. And the Bologna process consists of two major works. The left, the framework for qualifications of the European higher education area, describes the expectations of all students and from kindergarten all the way to the PhD. Those stages of development are divided up into 7 levels. And then the European qualifications framework for lifelong learning also supplements this first work and tries to stress how important it is for students to learn competencies and that they further develop it throughout their lives, so that learning does not stop at one particular level. So the framework, the mission of, or the basic idea for the framework published in 2005 is based on intergovernmental agreements within the Bologna process. You may know 27 countries are part of it. The framework's aim is to organize national higher education qualifications into an overarching European-wide qualifications framework. Within this framework, qualifications are defined according to levels of complexity and difficulty. Generic descriptors of the requisite learning outcomes at each level have been defined by experts, working groups within the Bologna process, and these descriptors are broadly applicable in all national contexts. So this reading, this mission of this project and this program, knowing now that how the term mobility can also be used and no longer just focuses on language, but on so many other aspects. And this is where the WAC pedagogy comes in with rhetoric and some other things. So this to me is really important. And so these are the 5 significant qualifications that signify the completion of the first cycle, the bachelor's degree. And so I just want you to focus on point number 5. Students at the end of their bachelor's can communicate information, ideas, problems, and solutions to both specialist and non-specialist audiences in their mother tongue, in parentheses, or in English or another language within the European Union, so they can participate in the global economy. So I think this is really helping me and the teachers at those high schools and faculty to see how important it is to connect all the different pieces at those schools, what students are learning, and not just to think about preparing them for their specialty and moving forward. So the second piece from 2008 is the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning, and that is it is a meta framework that forms a translation device between different, mostly national qualification systems. So it is an attempt to still give each country an opportunity to develop programming and teaching and pedagogies that are unique and reflect their culture, their diversity of ideas, but still kind of unites them on a meta level. And so I read the second part. Each of these qualification systems needs to link its qualifications to the EQF by developing a compatible national qualifications framework. The EQF has 2 self-described principal aims: to promote citizens' mobility between countries and to facilitate their lifelong learning. The EQF was formally adopted by the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union in 2008. So here are the major learning outcomes from the EQF. These are lifelong learning outcomes for the bachelor again. Advanced knowledge, advanced skills, manage complex technical or professional activities or projects, and take responsibility for managing professional development of individuals and groups. What is missing here, though, is communication, written or oral communication. This is implied, and there are, you can find brief descriptions within the EQF, but this is a little bit of a letdown, but it still helps us to define what mobility is, and then how can writing or communication help us. So that is the issue a little bit that we are facing writing as part of WAC. And so when talking with these faculty, and I guess mostly by phone to prepare this event, because at that time Zoom was not really on anybody's radar in 2018, at least not on mine. So we used Google Hangouts, but mostly phone conversations to plan it. And so what my approach was for the two schools was to compile a list of rhetorical theories and strategies, and to help students to have a toolkit at the end to be aware of the things that are happening around them that they're already doing, or also prepare them in thinking what awaits for them on the college level. I don't know if anybody, or who of you has been to a previous talk 2 hours ago or 2 sessions ago, where Magnus Gustafsson and Tian Donahue spoke about the diversity of assignments, of teaching, of collaborative learning, either in Sweden and in France at those particular universities that they're researching. So it was really important to see that there is a lot of flux, of fluidity. There's not something that we have been thinking about, like there's students that go to high school or to the gymnasium, they pass the Abitur, they are all prepared to start their major, going to college, because there's such a diversity in teaching and learning, and in the way those European Union the competencies from the European Union framework have been, no, I was looking for the word, have been, would have manifested themselves in higher education. So here is a quick overview to what this workshop has covered, and so what areas the contents have drawn on. So literacy and rhetoric are two topics that are usually not taught in high school or in colleges in Europe. Rhetoric is not a subject that you can major in, or that you can write your PhD or a dissertation in. So this is something that was well received during the workshop and during the discussions with faculty, because they realized that they are using rhetoric. And when I grew up, I was using rhetoric, but we didn't have a term. We were not able to point to a theory and discussing it and describing it. So other things in that workshop for discussions, which was like alternating between activities, sharing, introduction to new concepts, or a clip, or different things. So I'll be happy to talk more about this if there's any interest. So, but these are theories from first year English, from WAC, and then theories from professional writing, knowing that about 30 to 40% of students who are getting an Abitur will not go to college. They will still try, they have better chances with an Abitur after 12 or 13 years to get accepted into an AA track or community college track. And that's why I included this aspect about professional writing too. What are patterns of technical communication, project management, ethics and communication, and building trust. And then we ended the workshops with a focus on think about transfer when whatever you do, always figure out where else can you apply it. This is not just for the assignment. This is not just for this teacher, not just for this class. And so my conversations with the teachers, which were not organized, but they invited me to come to the teachers lounge, and whoever was there had conversations, and some teachers also audited the workshops and then took notes, and then we had discussions afterwards. So they also were excited about the possibility of knowing or having language that tells them that teaching for transfer is so important, and it is also possible. Next steps. So I'm still in touch with these schools. We decided not to do workshops via Zoom because they were already so tired and overworked, the teachers and the students, throughout this whole process. But hopefully, we were thinking actually this fall, but as the numbers are going up with the virus and its mutations, we probably have to postpone it to next fall, 2022. Continue with the workshops and include pre and post survey with IRB approval, and look at a longitudinal study, which was really exciting for me to see that out of the 60 students, 5 actually started college in the United States after they left the Abitur. So that was a little bit amazing, but also exciting that they were recruited, and they thought they were not well prepared, but I figured in the workshops, they were one of the top students. But I would like to follow students and see which ones go to the A8 route, or the college in Germany, college in the European Union, maybe college in the US, and see how the awareness of mobility and theories from WAC and first year English and professional writing, how can that help them to succeed. And then on the faculty side, the survey on current practices and strategies, apologize, there's a word missing, and then the WAC with workshops to actually assist them in identifying intersecting possibilities for teaching and learning. So that became clear during actually one dinner one night when teachers asked for that. So it seems like what I've heard at this conference, it's always better to first listen, what I'm a listener anyways by nature, but also to see what the needs are and let teachers discover what they want, and then being able to provide it to them. So I think here are my references, and I'll be happy to answer questions and more specifically, but thank you.
Thank you, Stefan.
Yes, thank you, Laura.
Yes, may I speak?
Yes,
okay, so the first thing the first connection that I'm making here is with the situation that we find ourselves in here in the States, with a lot of institutions where, oddly enough, they are, well, not oddly, I guess, they're trying to capitalize on, I guess, the more financially viable programs by instituting sort of a narrowing. Sometimes it's called pathways, sometimes it's called something else, where they're trying to funnel students immediately into these narrow paths so that they stay on this path and they take these particular courses, and then we could sort of spit them out at the other end. And the idea is it's supposed to increase this actual graduation or attainment of whatever they're supposed to attain. And so you've got that, which sounds a lot like less mobility. But then we combine that with the fact that in our institution materials and in our mission statements and all this, we talk about lifelong learning, which you also mentioned. We want to create this situation where the student values lifelong learning and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, these two things don't necessarily go along. But I realize that when they talk about lifelong learning, they're really talking about trying to give students this idea that they can keep coming back to this sort of academic machine so that the machine can keep running. But I piggyback onto that as a faculty member by talking to my students about keep them hooked on credentials. Absolutely correct. By talking about lifelong learning, and I show them the little thing in our mission, and I say, why do we want this? Because you need to be mobile. You need to be able to do whatever you need to do throughout your life. You're not always going to be exactly what you are today. Things are going to change. You're going to need different knowledge. You're going to have different desires. You're actually going to be the same person and yet a different person, blah, blah, blah. You know, I give them my talk, you know, I'm really good at that talk. I'm just not going to subject you guys to that. And so talk about that. And the sad thing is I really do believe the whole lifelong learning thing, but that was the connection that I was making there. Now, I don't know if I'm making exactly the connections that you were hoping for, but what I am thinking is, as a person who incorporates lots of writing into her science classrooms, that maybe I need to be thinking more along these lines in the assignments that I'm creating, and thinking more, look at that, Andrea, I'm already using your stuff, thinking more along the lines of how am I going to get these students to be thinking about their need to be and their ability to be not just academically, but also mentally mobile throughout their entire lives. So this is where your presentation sent me. I don't have a question. That's just, that's my response. And thank you. It's giving me a lot to think about.
Thank you, Laura. I think one thing that the David Foster article does very well, it shows how even though people or the students start in 5th grade or 7th grade to specialize, there's always a bridge to another pathway. And yeah, but when it came to the European idea of mobility, it was focused on language, and less on disciplinary knowledge. And so, and knowing how to communicate within the discipline. And so I could tell you, I have like written down that I realized I didn't read much from my prepared notes, but so some of the pathways are languages. So most students learn 3 languages in high school, starting in 5th, 7th, and 9th grade. Some do add in 11th grade, they add Latin. It's still something widely taught. So yeah, but thank you, Andrea, for your point about mobile or nimble. Yeah.
I'm so intrigued by this concept of mobility because I teach a course called Why Go to University? It's kind of like, is it about citizenship, self-development, or getting a job? And of course, you know, and we read about the education industrial complex and the credential arms. We read a lot of Canadian stuff, but we read a lot of US stuff. But because where I thought you were going was because I know that in Germany there's a lot more early streaming, right?
Yeah.
But I think we hear a lot about access in the US and Canada. But you know, as we know, I sat in on a benchmarking session with a group of TAs for writing assignments in an econometrics class. And we were looking at scatter plots of mobility in the southern US. And it's like, there's no getting out of that poverty. Like, I mean, it was horrific, right? But I think, anyway, I want to read that book. But I'm also thinking about that, yeah, in terms of, because I noticed earlier in the chat, you mentioned something about assignments as basically blocks or tests, like to put up barriers, right? So I think there's a real link here to just a shift that we need to make.
Although it's old-fashioned, that I think that idea is changing, and I think, and maybe I'm not correct here, but I think that as the faculty members who are willing, who are maybe a little younger, maybe a little more open, they're the ones who are changing that. And the some of the faculty members who've been having the most trouble recently. They're having trouble with the technology. They're having trouble with the changing ideas about how we're supposed to act in the classroom, this move away from gatekeeping and toward a more interactive and student-driven environment. Those faculty members probably are more likely to view assignments in that fashion. I know that a lot of the newer faculty members that I interact with are very much thinking of their activities in class as opportunities for them to reach out to students. And it's almost like it's just a more modern way of thinking. And certain individuals are not switching over, but maybe the rest of us are.
Yeah, there's a cultural shift.
Yeah.
I guess I think this is really interesting and important work. And I love how you're doing that listening work with the teachers and trying to provide both the teachers and it sounds like ideally the students with these tools, the rhetorical kind of tools, I guess, yeah, and transfer, which you mentioned, right? The concept, one of your key concepts from first year writing. So yeah, this is such interesting and important work.
So I wish I hope I can continue it. And thank you for your kind comments. So
I hope you can continue it as well. I really love how you said that you're a listener, and I'm thinking I'm a talker. So match made in heaven, right?
Well, we can still meet outside and later, and I can listen. Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both, Andrea and Stefan, for two really terrific presentations. I think one of the things we miss in these online spaces is that sound of applause. So I'll try to recreate that here. I like the icon too, Laura, but somehow that doesn't quite do it. I like
doing my best.
Yeah. No, I think it helps. Well, if there's nothing else, I think that wraps us up. I'll turn things back over to Michael now to see if he has any final comments to make. And thank you all again.